Welcome to Sunday with Shyevin. Today we have Irving Kriesberg's son, Matthias. If that is a sentence to describe Irving Kriesberg, what you going to say?
Oh, that's tough. I don't know how people imagine artists. He actually lived and maintained a kind of very simple life. And the complexity of the work and the complexity of his imagination is all in the work itself. As complex as the work was, as almost bizarre, unusual, the person always maintained a kind of like a very elementary relationship with the world. I think that was very surprising to people.
Being your father's son, are you proud of your father and being his son?
Oh yeah, yeah, and much more than ever. I think for two reasons. One, when I was much younger, I was uncomfortable for exactly the reason you asked, that he and thereby the family were profoundly different from the families and fathers of my friends. I couldn't really make sense of his work. It just seemed quirky. I couldn't find a proper context for it. But it's only, as I said, in the last 10 years or so that I began to pay a lot more attention to the work, and it made more sense to me. And then since he's died in the last, again, 10 years or so, I think in retrospect, and you can see from his writings, he was actually kind of a brilliant guy.
Yes.
But he wasn't an academic. He didn't give that impression of being somebody in the clouds at all. He was very, very down to earth, right? But so it's hard almost to match up in retrospect the quality of life, the kind of life he lived, with the work itself. Managing the collection, it means ever more to me. I feel like I can get some distance now and not think about him, the person who did it, because now all that remains is the work. And it just seems actually more and more incredible to me year by year.
Yes, it is. It is really incredible. So how do you see Irving Kriesberg when you are young, Matthias, as your father and also as an artist?
Well, it's an interesting point you bring up, because you're constantly evolving. Like when you're a child, bit by bit, you mature. Your relationship with your parents changes. And so some of my earliest memories are going to gallery opening. My father was at Graham Gallery, and he would regularly have openings. Well, most of his life, Irving lived off his art, kind of for better or worse. As a result, like as a household, we didn't exactly have extra income. So, at that time, my world was very much like an artist's world. So my father was friends with other artists. He was close friends with Alan Capro, I can recall, and so that was very much the world that I grew up in. And so you don't question your parents in terms of what they're doing with their lives when you're very young, right? You just kind of take it all as it is.
Do you feel though, when you see your fathers basically like stay in the studio all the time and not dressing up and go to the office?
It is something that is a distinct memory. As you get a bit older, say now as you start to be, I don't know, 11, 12, 13, as a child, you have a great desire to be like and I became aware that all my friends had, exactly as you said, they had parents, they had a father who would go to work in the morning, come home at night. It was great. And we didn't have that, right? And I was very aware of the difference between his life and how that affected the household. So that's when I became very aware, how different our household was.
Do you think that he's influenced you from what he is doing since you are young into your life right now about art, how you see art and how you see your music?
Yes, but it wasn't something that happened right away. And when I think back of conversations I had with him, I mean, it's really, I would say I had to be an adult before I could talk to him about artistic ideas.
How old was that though?
Oh my goodness, probably it might be unusual, but it's really in the last 10 years or so of like the relationship evolved at that point to something that it had never been before. In part because he, began to decline physically, right, in his 80s, and I had just a greater and greater interest in his work, at least in my 20s, if not my 30s, in terms of really being mature enough myself to exchange ideas. I mean, it's not that. So when I first went to Columbia, and I was studying electronic music, and so I was about 17, 18 years old. He had just completed his film Out of Into, which is a kind of most ambitious animated film he did around 1971, I think. And I introduced him to my electronic music teacher, composer Bulent Arel. And my father came to the studio because my father was looking for a music score. He wanted to have some kind of score, and he asked me, "Will, what do you think?" And we talked about different ideas. That's kind of the first time that I got involved, in some direct way with his work. And so I brought him to meet Bulent, and Bulent said, "Well, I have some very talented students." And I said, "Bulent, I don't think anybody can do it the way you can." And so they kind of talked. And in the end, that Arel did write the score. It was really a wonderful score. Yeah. So that's that's the first time I had a direct involvement, but it wasn't exactly a discussion about art. Now, I'll tell you one of the most memorable conversations I had with Irving, and it's a very clear memory because we were driving down one of the avenues in New York. And, if you know New York, it's kind of very long and thin. So if you get on an avenue, you go a long distance, just like in a straight line.
Yes,
and,
that's right.
And so we were talking about, Irv was making the point that he didn't see the sharp distinction between abstraction and the figurative. And this made such a profound impression on me. I mean, to this day, and it has influenced I mean, I probably somewhat knew already that was his thinking, but he made the point that in a way, and the reason it's relevant to think about driving is because when you're in certain places in New York, if you're driving down the avenue, you can see a very great distance, more than you usually can in a dense city, but you can look straight down an avenue and see miles in front of you. And what he pointed out was that at the vanishing point, you're looking at something that's real, that's in effect figurative, that's part of the real experience. But at a great distance, it becomes abstract. And in the same sense, if you hold something very close to you, that becomes abstract too. So in a sense, it's not a clear demarcation between the figurative and the abstract. What it really is it's all on a spectrum. It's really a matter of perspective. And I think that's so much, what I began to understand is so much about his art and understanding his work was that it's on that fulcrum between the abstract and the figurative, and you can't look at it from just one perspective, because what's figurative, the animal figures, are not in his mind, and I know this from working on essays with him in the last years of his life, how he was trying to short essays that tried to explain how he thought about things, that you wouldn't look at the animal figures in a realistic way. You would look at them. He was like a figurative painter painting from an abstract sensibility.